Welcome to the BlackSheep Podcast. Today, we have an esteemed author and professor and thought leader, I would say, in a whole multitude of facets of life. I'm going to read from his book, The Long Surrender, a memoir about losing my religion. His little mini bio that's on the back. All right. Brian Rush McDonald is a psychotherapist in private practice in Alexandria, Virginia, where he treats individuals who are experiencing depression, anxiety, or life adjustment issues. He also provides couples counseling. He plays trombone on several community groups, loves jigsaw puzzles and crosswords. He and his wife Kathy love sailing during the warmer months. They have 3 adult children and 3 grandchildren. Now, I didn't read the majority of this because there's a whole lot more to your life beyond just the fact that you live in Alexandria, Virginia, and that you're a psychotherapist and everything like that. But I want to start off by talking about the book because I think it's a fantastic book. It's a really quick, easy read that I think takes you through the journey of your life seamlessly and really, I mean, you don't hide anything from what I can tell.
No, in fact, a friend of mine read it and he kept saying to his wife, I can't believe he put that in there.
Yeah. For listeners' reference, there is a line, actually multiple times, where you say "beat the meat." So you are not pulling any punches, and I love it.
I don't know people in North or South.
You might be pulling some other things, but not punches.
I mean, a lot of things that we said that were naughty down in the South, I don't know if we didn't get the memo or it got corrupted, but when I started being around people from other parts of the country, they were like, what is that? So we sort of evolved by the time it got down to us.
Well, I promise you that I've said that a number of times in my life, in my younger years. And I know Mason said it just last week. So
More than just said it. Brian, before we kind of dive into your memoir and your story, I am curious about the book cover. I love that image, yes. And I have never seen it in my life. Can you take us through a little bit about the image? Like, is this an original thing? Is this like an older image? I'm just so curious about it.
It's from the 19th century, a French artist, and it's really interesting how I came across that. We used to live in the Norfolk, Virginia area. That's called the Hampton Roads. It's Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Newport News, those places down there, and near Jamestown, the early days of our country. So I was visiting this museum down there once, and I saw this picture, and it was huge. I mean, it's like 15 by 8 or something. It's an enormous picture. And it just struck me because it reminded me of what happened to me, because I sort of signed up to be a minister at a very early age. And this is about a young man that joined the monastery. And he looks like after the first night, he's like, what have I gotten myself in? Yeah. And so I just wanted this for the book. Now, the painting that's in Norfolk was, I couldn't get the rights to it, but it turns out this same painter, this is an etching, believe it or not. And I'm not an art and so it's different than a painting, although it was the same picture and the same subject. Apparently at that time, it was unusual for people to look right at the painter while they painted. That was unusual. And this guy,
that's why it looks so modern, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, but this was back in the 1800s, I think. The artist was Gustave Doré. And but it just, I wanted that. And I found it. Oh, by the way, I found it at the Harvard, believe it or not. I mean, I didn't go there, but I found it. It's in the Harvard Art Gallery, and the etching is there, and it's in the public domain. So I was able to get it for the book. But I really wanted the book to be about my giving of my life to this calling. But as time went on, many years, I realized that should I have done that? As I said in the book, I really had wanted to be a musician. I mean, I grew up in the 60s when the Beatles and all those groups came out, and all you had to do was get a guitar, you learn a few chords, and you could sing those songs. They were great, you know.
Yeah.
So we did that. My brother was in like a rock and roll garage band for a while, and I hung out with those guys. Then I was in junior high, got in the band, and I started playing the trombone. I mean, I just loved.
And then you got into a ska band, right? That's just naturally what happens, right?
Well, ska wasn't known back then, but I was in a kind of a garage band that, like most of them, never really got off their feet because you'd always have some people that wouldn't show up half the time. But we liked to play music that had horns, and at that time, the two big ones, this was in the 70s, was Chicago and Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Hell yeah.
And they had horns, and we just worshiped them, you know. And so we tried to play some of those songs. There was another group that was short-lived but was fantastic. It was called Chase, Chase. And they had one, believe it or not, they were a jazz rock fusion group, but they had a hit on the pop charts. It was way up at the top. It was called Get It On. And it had these squealing trumpets, and it was like a huge hit. So those kind of, I had visions of being that type of musician. And but really the got involved in the Jesus movement that was going along. And you asked me more about that, but it was somehow I got the idea from some of the influence that, well, if you really play music that you like, that probably doesn't please God. If it feels too good, it's got to be wrong.
You got to play that boring ass music if you want to worship God.
All right, that stuff that like the organ, that puts you to sleep and all that. So, yeah.
That's kind of interesting. I think every person who grew up Christian has a similar story where, something secular creeped into their life, and it was supposed to be, excommunicated from your life. You were supposed to cleanse yourself of it. I still am a massive Beatles fan. I had Beatles posters all over my wall and everything like that. And my pastor was over one night, and he's like, I don't know if the Beatles really stand for anything that's godly. Have you ever listened to Keith Green?
Yeah, Keith Green, but he was a good singer.
Oh, he was great. I still love his music too, but he ain't no Beatles.
Well, the Beatles, I by the way, a 3 years ago, I guess it was before the pandemic, my wife and I and another couple about our age, we went to see Ringo Starr's All-Star Band.
Yeah.
And he is an old guy.
A little bit.
But he gets up there and he plays the drums and he dances around, and he's got some musicians from other well-known rock and roll bands and so forth, and it's pretty good.
It's very good. Yeah. It's fun to watch for sure.
It is. Yeah. Those guys were, Ringo was probably the least talented of all of them. I don't know. He'd probably say that too, but nonetheless, he's quite a character.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I could talk Beatles all day, so I'm not going to go on that road. Mason knows I'll talk Beatles all day. I've talked his ear off a number of times about it.
Yeah,
so.
I'm glad this is on the internet because I could at least mute Cullen when he starts getting on about the Beatles.
Well, have you ever seen that television documentary, I guess, called 8 Days a Week?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's great.
I love
those touring years were
Florida somewhere, and they were told that the black people wouldn't be able to. What did they tell them? They wouldn't be able to come in, I think. And the people were just like 19-year-old boys, and they said, "Well, that's stupid."
They said, "We won't play here then."
Yeah. Right. And you didn't turn the Beatles away in those days. If you had a chance to get them.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they were kind of groundbreaking in that respect.
In many regards, yeah. Love
Absolutely.
it for that.
Brian, let's talk about kind of the beginning of your story. Cullen and I grew up in the Midwest in evangelicalism, and that is its own kind of version of it. But it feels like if you grew up in the South in evangelicalism, that feels like you're growing up in the steroids of Christianity. Like it is so intense. And,
Mark
especially around that
McGuire
time,
hitting biblical bombs.
Right. Totally. So what was it like? I don't know if you grew up Christian or not in the South, but being from the South and being a Christian and obviously getting involved in the Jesus movement and all of that in the 70s, It must have felt intense. So I'm really curious about this early part of your story. What got you involved in all of this to begin with?
Right. My family wasn't particularly religious, although they were Baptists, but we didn't go to church very often. My grandmother that I talk about a lot in the book, she was religious in sort of a folksy way. You know, she didn't really know much about doctrine and, you know, dogma. She was just like, be a good boy and go to Sunday school and that kind of thing. But in high school, so I got in, it was during the time when there was the integration of the schools, and they had this, what they call busing, to try to get the balance of, you know, blacks and whites. And so my second year of high school, I went to a different school, and I didn't want to go there. I was unhappy about it. There was, you know, there were some fights and so forth that first year. It was rough. I think it was the right thing, and I'm glad that I had that experience, and I'm glad it happened. But, you know, the white people, let's face it, they didn't act right about that. Many of them did. But anyway, maybe that was part of it, because there was a lot of unsettling things. And I did play in the high school band, but I had this friend, and he was what was called a Jesus freak. I mean, he played in the band, but he brought his Bible every day. But he was kind of a hippie type, long hair and all that, you know. And so I kind of identified with that for a while. And of course, all the boys were starting to grow their hair long, you know, down here. And but so I kind of went with this, taking my Bible to school every day. I had a cross I wore around my neck, and we would have Bible studies and so forth. I didn't, at first, you know, reading the Bible, it was like, oh, that's where that story came from. I remember hearing about that, you know, that was kind of interesting. But then I was really troubled by this fact that people who didn't accept Jesus, as we were saying, would go to hell. And it really in fact, it was upsetting I couldn't eat after I read that. And I kept asking people about this, you know, that went to church, that were more mature, as they say, believers. Well, what about this? Is that true? Yes, that's the case. Well, I just can't accept that. They said, well, that's the reason we need to go and evangelize and so forth. But even then, it seemed to me like that was trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. I mean, not very many people were believing it.
Can I just say, every now and then when we get Southerners on this podcast, they've got expressions that I've never heard in my life, and I just hear them for the first time, and I just feel like a child learning language again. Like this is so great. Emptying the ocean with a teaspoon. I need to add that one to my repertoire.
But I grew up with a lot of storytellers, and that was what was good about. We didn't have the internet. In fact, we didn't even have many television shows. So you know, when Uncle George came, you're like, Uncle George, tell that one again about the time you did that, you know. That was our entertainment. But anyway, so about that time, I met a girl, and believe it or not, that is my wife today, 50 years later. But I started going to her church, and she had this very dynamic youth director. You know, he formed this evangelistic judo team. He taught us judo, and we'd go around and put on the judo exhibition in church. And then, of course, he would preach and ask people to come and get saved. And I guess that was
like, it's like the proto version of the power team, Cullen.
I mean, you know, back in those days,
phone books in half too.
Back in those days, you know, evangelicals would do anything they could to get a crowd. I mean, some bizarre things, you know, like,
yeah. Well, that goes back to like even like Billy Sunday and stuff like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Walking the tightrope on the roof of these big tents.
Oh, that Texas preacher that would bring his horse. He'd been a cowboy, and he would bring his horse into the church.
Oh, I love it.
Kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah, but, church has always been a spectacle, right?
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, I didn't realize, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds with this, but you know, this church was teaching me a lot of good things, but I suppose I say good things, pretty mainstream Christian things. But it sort of I realized a little bit now what I was getting into. We were going on to this trip, and we were going to be going to other churches. Actually, the churches were up in like Michigan and so forth, because that's where our youth pastor was from. We'd formed this
unsaved people in Michigan, right?
Well, no, that they were the fundamentalists up there, apparently, because when they saw the picture of our group, you know, the boys had long hair. I mean, you know, it wasn't that long, but it was down on our collars, and the girls had short skirts. and they said, you can't come to our church like that. And that was really shocking to me about the hair, because it had never occurred to me that that had anything to do with believing. I mean, it's like,
yeah,
I was just like blown away. It's like, what does, who, no one had ever said that. Of course, my father had said, you look like a vagrant, and, you know, I'm going to take you on Saturday to get your haircut. But nobody ever said it was anything about religion, you know. After all, every picture I'd ever seen of Jesus, he had long hair, and I realized those aren't authentic, but apparently people were comfortable with that all these years.
That's a good point.
But at any rate, in the end, we got our haircut short and we went on the trip. But that sort of began. What I didn't realize was that church, while it was a Southern Baptist church, it was an extremely conservative fundamentalist church. So later, when I started talking about maybe I'll go into the ministry or be a missionary or something like that, it was recommended, not that I go to the Baptist colleges, which were conservative in their own way, but it was recommended that I go to, you might have heard of Bob Jones University.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a shock because, I mean, I was in the Christian music scene to a degree. When you mentioned like my 5 albums, I mean, one has to be Andre Crouch. You know who Andre Crouch was?
I'm not familiar, no.
Andre Crouch is really considered the founder of Christian rock music. I mean, he was back in the late 60s and 70s. He was black. I mean, he kind of took that black gospel music and kind of made it a little bit more like rock, and he was a sensation.
Whoa, Andre, he was in a Michael Jackson song and a Madonna song.
Oh, wow. Was he?
Why have I never heard of this guy before?
Yeah, go to YouTube and put Michael Jackson live at Carnegie Hall. I mean, he was a force, but it was very moving. Even the other day, I went and looked at, you know, the live at Carnegie Hall video, and it's very moving. He was very sincere, but it was rock. You know, it's like finally we have our person that will lead us this rock music that's good, and we don't have to apologize for it. You know, there was one song that he wrote that became popular. Well, the one that I don't know which ones you would have heard of, but he wrote one called "Get All Excited and Tell Everybody That Jesus Christ is Lord." That was one.
Oh, yeah, I know that song for sure.
And another one that was a slower song was let's see, it was I have decided to follow Jesus. I don't know. It was something like that. He was very good. So I was all into that. But when I got to Bob Jones University, I don't know how much you know about that, but that was, I mean, it really was a cult. I didn't know what a cult was. But I mean, we weren't allowed to listen to any music, Christian, well, certainly no secular music, unless it was Beethoven or Bach or something like that. But if it was rock in any fashion, and they defined rock as emphasis was on beat 2 and 4 rather than on beat 1 and 3. So rock is like, right?
Yeah,
and so,
driving.
yeah. So we weren't allowed that. And not only that, it would be one thing to say we don't like it, but they'd say it was from the devil and all that. But, you know, the first year I was there, in a number of ways, I didn't like it, but I don't know. I was young. I didn't know what else to do. My parents were not educated people, so they didn't know where to send me to college. And my mother kind of liked it because it was real strict. You know, the boys and the girls couldn't go off campus together and all that kind of stuff. You had to get up at a certain time, go to bed at a certain time. It was like being at West Point in a way. So I kind of just
describe it.
I kind of drank the Kool-Aid, you know. I mean, after a while, okay, I mean, can't fight City Hall. This is the way it is. And so I was there. Actually, I even stayed for a master's degree, and there's a lot of things happened, and I talk about in the book that really should have raised my eyebrows more than they did. There was a lot of racism there. I mean, they were famous for not allowing blacks to attend. And when I first got there, that really upset me. I don't know if I didn't know that, because I had a black friend that I had met that was a Christian, and so suddenly they didn't allow blacks. I was just blown away. But they said, and they actually went to the Supreme Court of the United States about this in the 1980s. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah.
They said the reason they didn't allow blacks was that the Bible taught that the races shouldn't intermingle and they shouldn't marry. Now, since then, I heard one of the Bob Joneses say they didn't teach that. But listen, Mr. Jones, you did. I was there. I heard it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, and it was, I mean, it was the South. And sure, a lot of colleges had at one time didn't allow blacks, but it was changing and people were opening up, but they refused to.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one thing. But musically, so the one thing that I said, I was good at playing the trombone. I loved jazz. I loved pop music. And so I continued to play the trombone. Now I couldn't play that kind of music, but they had a pretty big music program there. They had a trombone choir. It was very good. And I played in that all the time I was there. So I kept my chops up, so to speak, playing the trombone. And so anyway, I went into the ministry. I became a foreign missionary. And slowly I became disenchanted with particularly fundamentalist Christianity. Although, you know, when it's your profession, it's kind of hard just to walk away. I mean, some people have been critical when they read my book, like, oh man, you're gutless. Why didn't you just walk away? Well, I had children. It was my profession. I kept thinking maybe I could find a way to make it work. And when I was a foreign missionary in Taiwan, I did have more freedom. I mean, nobody was around to tell me what to do. So I began to broaden my outlook in a lot of ways. And musically, especially, I was asking my son, because I have 3 children, and my oldest son is 45. And he really got into the Christian music scene when he was in high school. That's after we came back from being missionaries. And I kind of vicariously was into the Christian music scene through him, because by then I was in my 40s. But
what years again was that?
That would have been he graduated high school in 97, I think.
So like he would have been super familiar with like Tooth and Nail kind of bands. I
asked him today, I said, what were the ones that you were really into? Remind me. And he said, Jars of Clay, Newsboys.
Oh yeah.
Avalon.
Okay. So the CCM stuff. Yeah.
Audio Adrenaline, DC Talk, Take 6, Petra. Yep. And actually there was a group called For Him. My wife's cousin was one of those. And another group, I don't know if you've heard of it. Yeah, his name is Harris, and that's her cousin. But my wife's brother was in a group that they kind of got a lot of college students. It was called Truth. Have you ever heard of a group called Truth? And they went around and kind of, you know, cleaned up the rock music and went to churches, but it was very hip. And they put out a lot of records. And so we came from this scene, but it was like when I got into that fundamentalist scene, none of that.
Right.
You
know? No, totally.
In fact, you know, I hate the organ. In fact, I go to a Unitarian church. Which is, you know, I don't know if you know what that is, but it's probably the most liberal church there is. But our minister preached a sermon the other day, the title of it was "I Hate the Organ." And I said, "How did you come up with that title?" But when that's in your background and it was crammed down your throat, you know, it's like, I hear the organ and I get like PTSD. And it's like, oh my gosh, you know.
What about a good jazz organ?
Oh, well, yes. You know that in the jazz world, I don't know what they say now, but back in the rock bands, they used to call it playing a Hammond B3.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You know what that is?
Classic.
Oh yeah.
Ray Charles.
And jazz or the rock groups, you know, they always had in fact, a group that I loved was Sly and the Family Stone.
Oh, classic. Yeah, good stuff.
And they had a song, Dance to the Music, and he asked the different instruments to play. He said, I'm gonna play some bottom, and the bass would play, and then you say, I'm gonna play some organ. The B3 it's just a sound with that Hammond B3.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard.
It's classic.
It's hard to describe. It's great sound.
Well, especially in the Black church, that is a classic sound.
Oh, it is. Yeah. And you know, I hope it's okay to say this, but I was in a Black church once, and while the preacher was preaching, he had a guy playing the organ who would emphasize what the preacher said with the organ.
Oh yeah.
It was
I've
really
seen that too.
It was fascinating. You know, it was just
they play off each other so well. And it's not planned. I'm sure it's not necessarily planned where they know what each other's going to do, but they just sort of feel the energy of each other and, you know, work with that. And it's super impressive to watch.
It really is. And probably some of those preachers, if they don't have the organist, they don't preach. Because I mean, that's part of my. That's what I do.
You know, that actually leads me to a question though. growing up and everything, you're very specific in the book about, you know, living in the South Mobile, all that stuff. Stuff is not exactly what we consider kosher today in terms of race relations, right?
Yeah,
And you're immersed in that, and then you're at Bob Jones, and you're, you know, probably inevitably immersed in it even more there. What was kind of the tipping off point for you where you said, "Now this is not like the kind of culture that I want to be a part of"?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I was very disturbed because about the race thing, because during high school, of course, that at first I was very angry that because of the blacks we had to change schools and all this. But then I had this one band director that was very important to me, and then as Christians, then it was sort of the hippie, the Jesus freaks. We were like, every God loves everybody the same. That was one thing about the hippies. The influence of the hippies on our culture was that people are all the same. It doesn't matter what you look like, right?
Sure.
And so I really got a heavy dose of that. And then when I got into a Christian setting where they wanted to exclude blacks, I could not understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I really could not understand that. So I think that planted the seed. And the other thing was the teaching on, eternal damnation, which I never really could accept. So I just hid from that. It's interesting that is something that I now know whether you believe the Bible or not, but it's not really taught that clear in the Bible.
Right.
Certainly not from Jesus. In fact, did you see? I don't know if you know who Carlton Pearson was. He died the other day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he just died like this last week, right?
Right, and he was a Pentecostal preacher, big time, 6,000 member church. But he decided he didn't believe in eternal damnation, and overnight his church went down to a few hundred people, and finally had to shut the doors.
Wow,
that's something that has become a cardinal doctrine. That if you have to believe that.
Yeah. Well, and then remember, like the stuff with Rob Bell. I don't know if you were paying attention around that, but Rob Bell was a big megachurch pastor in Michigan, and in 2011 he released a book called Love Wins, where essentially he's making this argument for universalism, and overnight, well, he still remained like the pastor and everything, but it definitely tarnished his. Because he had like a couple books in the evangelical world, and he was a big, he did the whole evangelical conference speaker circuit and everything, and he immediately was not allowed to do any of that stuff anymore, and ultimately ended up leaving that church. I think on like good conditions with the church, but the broader evangelical community completely ousted him. In fact, there's a famous interview with I think it was Franklin Graham on Fox News that basically was like, Rob Bell is a heretic.
Yeah.
And so, he ended up getting completely ousted from that entire world for that. And that was 2011. But Carlton Pearson was probably a decade or so before even that all happened.
Yeah,
in 2011. I'm sure he was in the 90s or 2000s when that happened.
He was a protege of Oral Roberts. He was also a singer. I mean, he was like a runner-up for like a Grammy or something. He was a kind of a soul singer, kind of like, what was that guy's name that used to a black guy that sang, that was big?
That sang soul? I think all of them.
Yeah, that's true. There was one
Al
guy.
Green?
No, there was one guy that.
You're not whittling it down at all.
There was one guy that he didn't really sing. He always had a choir behind him, but he was just like, praise. I'll think of it in a minute.
Kirk Franklin?
Huh? Kirk Franklin?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Remember him?
Oh, yeah.
He didn't really sing. He's
still doing great stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, he was. And so I think Carlton Pearson was a little bit like that. And he was big. But he had the courage. I mean, he was coming from a little different place than me, but you got to hand it to him to be that big of a name and just say, no, I don't believe this anymore.
Done. Yeah.
Did you have, you mentioned that like you had some concerns and questions around eternal damnation,
right?
Obviously hell, and then obviously there were questions around race relation stuff that was going on in that time. I would imagine there were some other kind of topics that came up that you had some questions around some of the beliefs that you were told that you had to believe. were there any? Was there anybody that you were reading or listening to at the time that you were like, wait, like I don't necessarily have to believe Christianity this way. Like I can actually think about it this way. You know, like a lot of people now, there's all these sort of what people would say is like progressive Christian people. You know, like people like Rob Bell who got ousted. You know, there are those kind of people that. Wait, when they started having these questions, they realized, like, wait, there are other people that think kind of like this. Was there anybody that you were reading or whatever that was sort of along those lines that helped you kind of move out of that or think differently?
Yeah, I mean, much later, even when we were missionaries in Taiwan, I did a little bit more. I mean, when I was in that fundamentalism, I just wasn't exposed to, I mean, I wouldn't have known about these people. I mean, this was before the internet. So I wouldn't have known people that had these views. I read, though, a book that it's really not a religious book, but there was a professor at Emory University named James Fowler. Well, I'll tell you the book I read that was most influential. It wasn't really a religious book, but there was a man named M. Scott Peck, and he wrote a best-selling book called The Road Less Traveled. And he talked a lot about grace, but it wasn't so much the religious grace as it was just an approach to life that you accepted the beauty of life and that kind of thing. And that really appealed to me. And then he referenced a man by the name of James Fowler who had posited that there are stages of faith. And this is what I eventually did my doctoral studies on, but that people will go through stages. And that really made sense to me because as a young 17, 18-year-old boy, teenager, I looked at faith in a certain way. Everything, just like the preacher said, is right, it's right, it's right. There's no gray area. But as you go on, things begin to be less certain. And like probably you've experienced, and I have, you go to a place in your life where you're comfortable without certainty, right? I can't be sure of a lot of things, but I'm okay with that. But places like fundamentalism, they sort of park right there on that early stage, like, everything's black and white. The preacher knows the answers. You just need to do what he tells you. And they sort of build their whole denominations around that.
Right.
And so people change. Sometimes churches and denominations don't. And not all people do, but churches, they don't know what to do with people that grow out of their rigid belief systems. They don't have an answer to that.
Do you seem like a really happy guy, do you have any animosity or resentment towards the fundamentalists and the evangelicals that you were so ingrained in?
I was for a long time. For a long time I did. I mean, I was like, why didn't I just go to college? And I was originally going to study music, and a lot of down in Mobile, Alabama, the best music college nearby was the University of Southern Mississippi. So a lot of people went there, and I was like, why didn't I just do that? And why did I get involved in all this? And later on, I would be frankly embarrassed to tell people I went to Bob Jones University. In fact, I still am to a degree, because I don't want anybody to think I'm like a racist or, so like, why of all the colleges I could have gone to, how did I get involved in that? Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of which, when you were getting your job as a professor at places like George Mason University today, did you put that on your resume, Bob Jones University?
Sometimes I did. Sometimes I would just fudge a little bit and call it Jones University on the resume, and hopefully they wouldn't ask too many questions.
Smart move. Hopefully they didn't actually read it, right?
Because by then, the thing is, once you've got a higher degree from a reputable place, and I had gotten my doctorate from the College of William and Mary, which is pretty reputable around here. They don't really look where else, and most people don't know anything about it. I mean, there was a time when it was in the news a lot, but thankfully, it's kind of died down. But yes, I was ashamed of that, but I've tried to accept that this is just a part of my life. I mean, look, none of us choose where we were born, and frankly, things that we get involved in, we might think we decided it ourselves, but there's a lot of
there's a great quote from your book here that I think kind of lays out exactly what you just said there. And it's a rabbi speaking. He says, "I'm afraid I cannot show you the path out of the forest, but I can show you many paths that do not lead out." And I think that is, that's exactly what you're talking about. And I found that I don't highlight and write stuff in books very often, but that's one thing I did write. I did highlight because I found that to be a very
I feel like
intriguing point.
I tried my best to make Christianity work. I mean, I was trying. Is in the latter years when I was still a minister, I was like, look, even if I'm going to be the most liberal Christian in town, at least I'll still be a Christian. I kept trying to read all these liberal theologians and everything, and a lot of them have a lot of interesting things to say. But I kind of came to the conclusion that if you have to like redefine every aspect of Christianity in order to accept it, that's ridiculous, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I'm a follower of the teachings of Jesus, but not all of what Christianity, it's just too much, and it's oppressive, really. The thing you know, one thing that you said, I'm a happy guy. I think I am. And I mean, I've been able in the last 20 years to do things that weren't allowed. I mean, I play in a jazz band, which jazz was considered from the devil. And
those time signatures, that is straight from the pits of hell.
Oh yeah. In fact, some people have tried to discover what does jazz really mean. The word jazz, nobody knows. Some people have suggested it means sex, you know. But you know, some people think the father of modern jazz or the father of jazz was Scott Joplin. You remember that? You know Scott Joplin?
Yep.
And the music he played was called ragtime.
Ragtime.
And the reason it was called that was because to that point, music was very orderly. You know, you had Mozart and Bach and all this, and things were done a certain way. Well, his music was like he was playing something different in the left hand and right hand and different things. And people was like, well, that's all ragged. And then it began to catch on. Interestingly, there are no recordings of Scott Joplin that I understand, but we know exactly how he played because of the player piano. The player piano could basically record how a person played and play it back exactly that way. And so that's the reason we know how he played. But yeah, I mean, jazz is like, it's almost like you need to know classical music before you can mess with it. And that's what jazz and rock does, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that I just love, and you asked me, did you want me to talk about some of the albums?
Yeah. Should we get into that?
We can totally get into that.
I mean, some of them are things from a long time ago, but when I was learning, you know, I was like in the 9th grade and I was learning to play the trombone. The premier trombonist in those days, some people said the greatest in the world, but that's arguable. But he certainly was in the top 10, was a fellow named Irby Green. And he was a New York trombonist. And he, back in the late 60s, he made a record where he got the 20 best trombonists, all jazz players in New York City, and made an album. And they had some great arrangers. And it was called Irby Green and 20 of the World's Greatest. I mean, when I heard that, that was like almost like an orgasm when I heard that. That was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard in my life.
You had a tromboner, as they would say, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm sorry you said that.
A tromboner.
I will say that sometime and I'll get in trouble. That reminds me when you know, when everybody was getting an email address back in the Yahoo days, you know.
Sure.
And you kept trying things and know somebody already took it. Somebody already took it. You remember those days? So I don't know if any of you know anything about the trombone, but one of the ways you play vibrato is you just shake the slide, and that's called slide vibrato. And so I chose slide vibrato at Yahoo, AOL. Slide vibrato at AOL.com, and it accepted it. Oh my goodness. But I found people wouldn't open them from me. And one guy said, I thought that was some porno thing or something. So anyway,
that's the one downside to playing the trombone is you just you can't get out of the sexual innuendos of playing the trombone.
Probably not. I know. But I always used to joke, like, did either of you play in the band when you were young in high school?
No, I was never smart enough, and my parents wouldn't get me an instrument. So
I really wanted to play the drums, but I was supposed to have to play piano a couple years prior to that, and I was like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, in band, in those days, no girls played the trombone or the tuba or anything like that. But the other instruments, you know, the players seem to have a certain type of personalities. And the trumpet players, because they usually carry the melody, but they were the hot dogs, you know, they always had to be.
Right.
Trombone players were the mellow guys, you know, but
Yeah.
I always said, but we got the girls, you know, we were smooth, you know.
Yeah. They're like the drummers of a rock band.
Yeah.
The drummers were lowlifes.
Sometimes. Now the drummers for jazz bands. Ooh.
Yeah, drummers are a different breed. I mean, those guys, you know, they're a breed of their own. Oh yeah. Yes, I love jazz, but jazz musicians, they don't even speak regular English. Have you ever heard, you know, a lot of the expressions that we use now came from jazz. You take like a job is a gig.
Yep. A groove. Groove came from jazz.
Groove. Your horn is your axe. You know, the place where you stay is your pad. A lot of these things came from jazz.
Mm-hmm.
Smack came from jazz as well.
Did it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but if you talk to some of these hardcore jazz musicians and like, what did you say? You know, they just don't talk like regular people, but they can play.
The cool cats. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Album
so
number
that's
2.
one. Irby Green and the 20 other best tromboners in the world.
The other album, and I'm going to say it was like the first 5 Chicago albums.
Yeah. Wow. You're kind of cheating by picking the first 5, all 5. But we'll let you cheat.
I mean, they were all so good. Now, number 5, that was the last one I had, number 5, before I got involved in the rigid religion. And I think how many did they come out? 30 something eventually?
There's a whole bunch of them. Yeah.
And some people think, they need to just give it up. But they, you know, they had the horns. And then
25 or 6-4. That song in particular. Woo!
I mean, those guys were on drugs and stuff when they wrote a lot of that. And I heard one of them ask, what did that mean? You know, and 25 or 6-4. He said, we were like up all night, you know, making up a song. And somebody said, what time is it? And the other was like, it's like 25 or 26-4. You know, that became the name of the song.
I love singing that song in my car and in karaoke every once in a while.
Oh, dude.
Great song.
Another one that was in Chicago 5 was Saturday in the Park. That was a good one. Have you ever heard that one? So going to jazz, one of the great jazz albums was by Miles Davis called Birth of the Cool.
The greatest. Yeah.
That might be, I mean, it's certainly up there. That's a great album. And the one
I personally am much more of a fan of Bitches Brew.
Oh, really?
That album just like blows my mind.
Every time. So that's also a Miles Davis album, huh?
Yeah. And that's like one of those, it's like a full experience. I have it on vinyl, thankfully. And if you open up the vinyl artwork and everything, and you listen to the music while you're looking at the vinyl artwork, it's another step in the experience. That is
it like an orgasm?
It's like an orgasm.
And listen, the part about me saying the orgasm part, don't put that on the YouTube. I'll be in trouble. That'll be like something. But
that's all right.
The other album,
we're not going to get demonetized. I don't know about you, but we won't get demonetized by saying orgasm.
The other one is one of the all-time great innovators in music, not just jazz, but jazz, was Dave Brubeck.
Yes.
And you know, he
Take 5, right?
Take 5, and that, I mean, there are other songs written in 5/4 time, but usually they're very awkward. That one just works. It just works. I mean, it's like, you don't think you're listening to something that's in an odd time signature. And so, I mean, he was a real innovator, but his band, or it was just a combo. He had a saxophone player named Paul Desmond, and he's my favorite alto sax player ever. He just has such a sweet sound.
Same here.
Yeah. So those could be the 5. I didn't mention the Chase. I did have an album of the Chase, but just that song, literally when I would hear Chase squeal those trumpets and get it on, I would get like hair standing up on my neck and all those things. Yeah.
Anything else that was standing up?
Well, those are, I mean, albums are kind of now coming in more into the modern era. What did I like? You know, I've been into a group the last few years, and please don't laugh, but it's the Avett Brothers.
Yes.
Do you know the
Oh
Avett
yeah,
Brothers?
for sure.
Of course.
Of
course.
Yeah, the song "Head Full of Doubt" I think is one of the most beautifully written songs of all time.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard that song, but
I don't know
that song makes me cry almost.
Yeah. I mean, they're very philosophical, and I like that.
Brian, have you ever heard of Fleet Foxes?
No.
If you like Avett Brothers, I feel like you'd also like Fleet Foxes. Cullen, do you feel like that's about right? Like if you're a fan 100%. Of one, you'd be a fan of the other.
100%.
And especially Fleet Foxes also feels like a very philosophical band. There's a podcast that Cullen and I listen to called Song Exploder, and they get these musicians that like break down their songs to talk through them. And most of them are like, yeah, it was like high one night and blah 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 blah. Like Fleet Foxes, the guy, their songwriter, that guy just like goes all in. Like, yeah, I was like thinking about this like one like historical event that I was watching, and it was just like he just is so nerdy about all of it. And I think you'd really appreciate Fleet Foxes.
Yeah,
I'm going to look that up. Yeah,
you definitely should.
I mean, I grew up with during the 70s and 80s, and I love the folk music. I loved Bob Dylan and those people that sang those Peter, Paul, and Mary. I mean, these songs were really good.
Have you listened to any modern jazz?
Not as much, but jazz is such a broad term, but
it is
not as much modern. But I do try. I'm open to any kind of music.
Can I give you a couple suggestions of some of my favorites of some modern stuff? There's a band called Snarky Puppy. It's a terrible band name, but it's a great a group of musicians. Absolutely next level.
Almost as bad as Tool.
It's almost as bad as the band name Tool. Yes. No, Snarky Puppy is the band name. Another one is by a fantastic artist that I think is doing some of the most innovative work ever. His name is Kamasi Washington.
Oh yeah, you've shown me his stuff. He's legit. That guy's legit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very, very good stuff. I think you'll enjoy it a lot.
I'm going to look. Oh, I thought of something else that I was really into while my son was in high school and college. Was the Cherry Poppin' Daddies.
Yeah, the swing revival stuff. Yeah,
Zoot Suit Riot.
Zoot Suit Riot. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I love the music, and I went with my daughter to like a concert of them one time, and that was interesting. I mean, the lead singer of that thing he would never stop moving, and he was like wrung out with sweat when it was over, and it was really interesting. But the kids doing the swing dancing, I mean, it was such a happy music,
Yes, yeah.
But they were sort of ska in some ways, weren't they?
In some ways,
the ska and like swing revival was like kind of at the same time, and there was certainly like bands that kind of crossed over a little bit.
Yeah, like another one was Brian Setzer Orchestra.
Yeah.
I forgot what was their song that was real popular, but anyway, they had that ska swing feel to them. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Did you ever listen to Five Iron Frenzy? They were a Christian band, still are.
No, I think my son did some stuff. Are they still around?
Yeah, if your son was like, a fan of Christian music in the 90s, he would for sure know Five Iron Frenzy.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they were like kind of the prototypical Christian ska band. In fact, a lot of the Christian ska bands were really, a lot of like Christian music wasn't necessarily all that critically acclaimed in comparison to the mainstream. Similar artists. But Christian ska very, very typically was like as critically was as reputable as all the mainstream stuff. So Christian ska had like some level of influence on the mainstream genre of ska. Like it's pretty cool to see a Christian version actually have like some sort of mainstream success, and also like influence a lot of bands that were not even in that Christian world.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't Bono and weren't they sort of a Christian group to start with?
Yeah, they had some adjacent themes, I would say. Yeah.
But they weren't necessarily marketed as a Christian band. Like they weren't going to be sold in like Lifeway, if you remember Lifeway.
Yeah. What is interesting how many of these what was that guy's name? I mean, this was ages ago now. But anyway, he was a Christian singer back in probably the 60s that kind of crossed over and had some popular songs. And I heard him say one time how hateful some of the Christian people had been to him when he did that. B.J. Thomas, who I'm trying to think of.
B.J. Thomas. Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking you were thinking of Norman Greenbaum.
Okay.
The Spirit in the sky. Yeah.
Oh, another one that did that was the girl. What was her name? Baby.
Oh, Amy Grant.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, she definitely had crossover 100%.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And of course, a lot of the black singers, start out in church. I mean, it's funny how I know it sounds sort of like stereotypical to say, but most white people can't sing worth a hoot. If you're standing around singing the national anthem, it's pathetic, Well, you're around.
It's so true. It's so true.
Black people, they can sing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't even think because they sing for like an hour and a half during church.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. One time I had a client a black guy, great guy. He married a white woman, and he said, so he started going to her church. He said, I like white church because you get out in time to go home and watch football. Yeah.
He didn't have to do vocal runs for like an hour and a half.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. Even my son now, my youngest son and his wife go to a Catholic church, but there's one in Washington, D.C. that's sort of a black Catholic church, which is not that common. But they even do that. They go into the afternoon.
Really?
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Can't beat it.
That's awesome. Brian, what do you want to plug? Obviously, The Long Surrender is out, and people can buy it. Where do you want people to buy it? Where do you want people to get connected with you?
It's available on Amazon, and I have it under my full name, Brian Rush McDonald. And I think it's a story. If people have a lot of questions about their faith, or they've kind of left it, but they feel ashamed, or it's kind of a companion to you, like you're not alone, And I mean, I tried to say what it was really like, and I feel like there was a man who wrote a book years ago that said, when we talk about religion, let's be honest. That's something that most people aren't honest about. They really aren't. Right. And when you are honest, some people get really upset with you, particularly down in the South where I'm from. I mean, if you're a good person, you're a religious person.
Yeah.
If you're not religious, how could you be a good person? And I think I was sort of deluded thinking that, people will read this and they'll understand the qualms I had and the problems. Well, the people who understand it are the people who are on the fringe that have always had problems with it. But the faithful, they don't even read it. They just read the synopsis and said, well, you need to get right with God. You need to read the Bible more. And that gets me, well, you need to read the Bible more. I think I've read it more than all of them. I really do. I know it very well. I know it very well. And it's like, I think Mark Twain was quoted. Now, who knows if he really said this, but somebody said, doesn't it bother you, the things that you don't understand that's in the Bible? And he was quoted saying, no, it's the things I understand that bother me.
Yes.
I mean, that's some really troubling things.
Leave it to Mark Twain to just synthesize it perfectly, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
that's great.
Thank you guys. I mean, I was thinking, well, I don't know if I've got anything to say for their program, but I do know that have you seen a lot of these things, Facebook groups and so forth called like exvangelical?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Mason especially is huge in that world. Yeah.
Really? Yeah. Now, unlike a lot of these people that are in these deconstructing, some of these kids were homeschooled. They went to Christian schools their whole life. And that is really hard to get away because they don't really know anything else. I was lucky that I went to public schools. My parents weren't religious. So even though I got deep into it, I knew that there had to be something else, right?
Right.
Sure.
And so a lot of these kids that I say kids, they're adults now, but they're angry, and I don't blame them. They did either of you grew up in some of those kind of like ultra Christian environments?
Neither one of us were like homeschooled or went to like Christian school. I guess I went to a Christian college, but yeah, we were sort of like you, where we grew up in that, Christian environment. And both, Cullen and I's parents were both very deeply religious. So, yeah, we both definitely felt that intensity, but we also like didn't go to like a Christian college, or we didn't go to Christian school, or we weren't homeschooled.
Yeah. So it was interesting because the whole Christian college, well, the Christian school movement in the Christian colleges, they wanted to keep people away from other influences, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it, like you asked, did I read other authors not back when I was associated with Bob Jones and all that? They wouldn't have allowed those books to be sold in their bookstore or be in their library, right?
Right.
And so that's what's not just fundamentalist Christianity, but you take some of the cults, and I would say that fundamentalist Christianity is a cult in a lot of ways. They keep their people. In fact, they discourage their people from listening to other people's viewpoint. Like if somebody tries to explain to them why they don't believe, the leaders say, "Don't listen to that, because that will rock your faith."
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting where it goes even beyond just religion, and it also moves into like the political realm and into like the social life. Like you're not allowed to have anything but like a traditional nuclear family and all that stuff too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's beyond just Christianity. And
you got to listen to Keith Green instead of the Beatles.
That's right.
Yeah, that's true. And the thing is, what makes it so then devious is if you're in one of these really closed off groups, that the things that could help you see your way out are forbidden to you, right?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to. I read an interesting, that church in Kansas called the Westboro Baptist. They're the ones that protest about gays and all that. One of their children defected from that. She's written a book.
I've seen this before. I've seen this story.
It's really interesting because they were such a closed system. In fact, that church was really all just one family. They came from this father who had a bunch of kids, and then they all had a bunch of kids. And, when they were real little, they took them out to hold signs that said God hates fags and all that kind of stuff. But this girl that wrote the book, I'll think of her name in a minute, but she became their social media person. And she would take the criticism that came on social media. And there was this one guy that was patient and kind, but firm about criticizing their church. And to make a long story short, she left the church and married that guy.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. That one piece of outside influence that was able to speak to her directly, right?
Yeah, I mean, at first, all she gave him was the pat answers of why he was wrong. So that kind of speaks to us. Like, it seems like people say, "Oh no, you're on the wrong path. You're gonna go to perdition and whatever." But they're saying that in defense of where they are. But that doesn't mean they might not be thinking about it too.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and to me, that gives me a lot of hope. Like, as much as I feel discouraged about what's going on in the world, to know that somebody could be a child in the Westboro Baptist Church, and even her life is able to change for the better, that gives me a lot of hope that all of us, wherever we're at in our lives, we can change for the better too. And so, whether we're somebody as deep into fundamentalist Christianity as the Westboro Baptist Church and we change, or wherever we're at in our own lives right now, like, we can change, and that gives me a lot of hope.
We can change. And as a therapist, sometimes people will say to me, "Well, people don't change. You're wasting your time being a therapist." Well, I say, "Well, I hope you're wrong. I hope they do change." I believe people can change. I do.
Yeah. I mean, we see a lot of people that have done a lot of bad things in the world, and to know that even that is not the only thing that person that's not the final word for that person, that they can still change. That gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, and I think a lot of I know a lot of the things you see in Facebook from the deconstruction groups and all that are kind of, snarky and about, Christianity. And I mean, I get it. It feels great to be able to say those things. but I don't know how much good that does to convince the other side, really.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for chatting about the book. Just so exciting to hang out with you.
Yeah.
And it's been really great, and hopefully the book is doing well. And
Well, thank you. And let me know when if you are able to, broadcast the podcast or whatever, let me know. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
And you guys are great. I appreciate you. You're really nice. I appreciate what you're doing. And I know it's a big commitment to keep a podcast going. So kudos to you and keep it up.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.